Shalom, this is Avraham Shira from Erev Israel. Welcome to our Friday afternoon talk before Erev Shabbat Kodesh. We are in Parshat Emor, and the famous verse, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, Emor el Kohanim b'nei Aaron. The verse begins with an idea, and we're going to take that idea on a little journey. Or perhaps the idea will take us on a journey. But it says in the Zohar Kadosh, in the Parsha, why does it say B'nai Aaron? We already know Aaron is the Cohen, and his children are the priests that follow after him for all time. But we see that the Zohar says it's because God was emphasizing that it had to be the children of Aaron because he was the first priest, and not simply his tribe, the tribe of Levi, who, of course, Moses was a Levi, and Miriam was a Leviah, and Aaron himself. All of the people that came from the son of Jacob, called Levi, are called Levi'im. But it had to be the specific tribe of Aaron. God was making a tribe of priests, because he tells us why. Because Aaron spent his whole life trying to make peace in the world. Peace between friends, peace between husband and wife, peace between tribes, peace between himself, the tribe, the Jewish people, and of course, our Father in heaven. So he dedicated his whole life to making peace, and therefore God said, well, the appropriate reward for someone who dedicates himself to an idea is that he becomes the leader of that idea. And his children after him, of course. Now, what does this have to do, as I titled this class, Nuclear War and Shabbat? Well, we're going to see very quickly. Because Rabbi Nachman, 200 years ago, which is 3,100 years after Aaron, the priest, walked this planet, Rabbi Nachman said, near the end of his life, in the book Siach Sod Sarfei Kodesh, which literally means the secret speech of the fiery angels. It's a nice title for a book, by one of the great students of Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Natan. He says over there, before he died, that one day there will only be one hill and one tree left in Russia. Now, Russia's a big place. And we take these rabbis on their word. Was he giving us a prophecy of the future? Well, Rabbi Nachman has said many things that came true. And many great rabbis over all the generations have said things that have come true. So prophecy is a human phenomenon that arises from its relationship to God. But the most evil of all prophecies, the prophecy of nuclear war. And why did he prophesy against the nation of Russia? At this time when he spoke, there was no Ukraine as we know it. Ukraine literally means, in the Russian language, a border land. In other words, the borders of Russia were the Ukrainian country, because, of course, to the east would be the nations of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and on the other side, of course, we have Romania and Bulgaria and Moldavia. And so Ukraine was like the frontier to the south and the east of Russia, but it was all one country. Only until 1991 was Ukraine even declared its own sovereign state. Okay, that's not really our essence of importance here today. What's important is, why would the rabbis start to preach and prophecy against Russia? Well, we know that the Bible has some other references to the Armageddon, the War of Wars, the final battle between what we call the forces of good and the forces of evil, which I like to call rather the forces of truth and untruth. But we have to remember one thing in all of this discussion, and it is being discussed all over the world at all different levels and all different religions. People are talking about nuclear war. People are talking about the prophecies in Christianity, the prophecies in Islam. And of course, here we are, the Jewish people, who were the, the people who really introduced the concept of national prophecy to the world. But there's one rule we have to remember. No negative prophecy has to happen. Remember that. No negative prophecy has to happen. Because humanity is in partnership with God. And therefore, we have the power to change the course of destiny. That's what it means to be created in God's image. That we are not bound by destiny. We are created in a destiny, and we get to choose or to direct destiny's path towards good or the opposite. So we should never listen or hear talk of negative prophecies or prophetic discussions, or obviously in the media they're not called prophetic, they're called predictions. It's a nicer word, you know. But the point is that we have the power to change them. And right now, 44 million people, I guess about 5 or so million have already left Ukraine, are sitting under the shadow of death. And then the Russian people, another 130 million people, who knows what's going to happen if they send a rocket to the wrong country. They might get a few back. And next thing you know, we're in the middle of nuclear holocaust. So always remember that we have the power to change things through our own good deeds and our own prayers. And don't say that you're a small person and therefore you don't count, because you don't know the scales of heaven. We don't know how God weighs things, but for certain He does not weigh things the way we weigh things. One person versus 10 people, because one good person can tip the scales for 1 million people who don't know their right from their left. And that's the story, of course, of Jonah, or Yonah as he's called in Hebrew, the prophet who was swallowed by some giant fish and then coughed up onto the sea and went to the city of Nineveh and prophesied. Then from his words, the entire city, millions of people were saved. So we don't know what we can do or what we can't do. That's God's business. But what we know is that what we do counts. Otherwise, we don't live in a unified field of God's oneness. Now, hold on to that phrase, unified field of God's oneness. Well, hopefully we're going to come back to that. So Rabbi Nachman prophesied against Russia that it would be one tree and one hill. That doesn't sound good for all the other mountains and all the other forests, but, let's not go into the detail too much. Rather, let's go forward and look elsewhere in the Torah. The Zohar told us 2,000 years ago that there would come a day in the great city of Rome, Romi Rabbati, which we know in the literature of Zohar that refers to the great city of the Roman Empire of the day. Not Rome of today, and not Rome of Caesar, but rather the Rome of USA. And the capital city of USA, it might be Washington for the politicians, but it's not the capital city of finance and business. New York is. And it said on one great day in the future, 3 great towers would fall in fireballs. It says this in Parshat Bishalach on the 8th page, if you want to look it up. 3 great towers and fireballs would fall, and the whole world would be in tumult. And many decrees would be decreed, and many things would happen because of that. So there we have another prophecy about things that happened in our times, in 9/11, that these towers fell in New York. And it was really, the Kabbalists say, it was a shift between the rulership of the angels in heaven, because there are 70 primordial archetypal nations. Not the 300 nations we have today, but 70 original nations that came out of the sons of Noah and spread into Asia and Africa and Europe. And those 70 primordial nations had an angel, a spiritual force. If you don't like the word angel, don't use it. Call it a conduit of energy from the infinite. And every nation has its own conduit, and each nation has its time where its conduit is dominant. And at 9/11, the Kabbalists all said here in Jerusalem, that's a sign that the shift is taking place between the angel of Esav, the angel of Rome, being conquered or taken over or replaced by the conduit, what we call the angel of Yishmael, which of course are the Arab nations under Islam. Another prophecy about end of times. Now, elsewhere, we look in Zechariah, the 14th chapter. It tells us that in the war of Armageddon, Gog and Magog, there will be a cloud the shape of a palm tree. Now, what does that mean, a cloud in the shape of a palm tree? I don't think you need much of an imagination. All you need is YouTube, and you can go on, you can see all the nuclear test explosions that have happened in history to understand the prophet, how he translated that image into an image that could be recorded for history. And that image tells us that there is a possibility of nuclear warheads, atomic warheads being exploded in this world, in this generation. Along comes Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, the Gra, as he's called in the rabbinical world. And Rabbi Eliyahu said that this Armageddon war would be 12 minutes long. Not 12 months, not 12 years, like many wars, 12 minutes. Now, who has ever heard of a 12-minute war? What could that be? Going forward, we have another prophecy in the Haftorot of Sukkot that the king of the north will join up with the king of Persia together to attack Israel. Now, who is Persia today? Well, not everybody agrees, but most scholars say it is Iran. And the king of the north, well, if you go straight north of Jerusalem, you'll end up in Moscow, or a few kilometers, I think, right. So what's this connection between Persia and Moscow? But rather we know that the ancient tradition is that the sons of Abraham and Isaac, Esav, and Ishmael will never get along with the tribe of Jacob. Who Jacob, of course, was the father of the Jewish people, and Ishmael was the father of the Middle Eastern people, which became Islamic not long ago in the big history of time, and that Esav would be the forefather of all the European peoples. And we are told that they cannot get along. And we see all throughout history the Christians and the Muslims have been fighting everywhere. In Europe, in the Middle East, in North Africa, everywhere. Because they're not supposed to get along. Because the rabbis tell us in the Talmud that if Esav, the people of Esav and the people of Ishmael get together and make peace with one another, they'll destroy the world. So the Jewish people are like the little balancing element between the right and the left, between Ishmael and between Esav. And if the Jewish people are a problem for either one, well, we've seen what's happened over this bitter exile. But we're talking about now the war of the end of days. We're talking about giant nations coming against little Israel. Why would Russia have a problem with Israel? Well, we know Persia has a real big problem with Israel, the Iranian Ayatollahs, and the whole Shia branch of Islam is not only against the Jews, of course, they're against the Sunnis, because that was a split that happened in Islam after Muhammad died. And it's an interesting split, by the way, because it's the split between monarchy that's passed down father to son versus Republican elected leaders that would take over the leadership in a new generation. And the Sunnis were those who followed the path that we should take the elders and elect a new leader from the elders. And the Shias all said, no, we're going to go with Ali, the son of Muhammad. And so you see that split is a very good marker for us in the historical development of nations and governments and politics, because they're two really different types of thinking, whether there's a monarchical leadership in a country or a republican one, a representative one. However, all of this, remember, doesn't have to happen. If we as a people and we as individuals do the best that we can to return to Hashem, to bring good deeds, to tip the scales, because one man can tip 1,000,000, remember. Now, we also know, this is a very interesting idea, that we pray it 3 times a day, and it's written in the literature many places. On that day, God will be one and His name will be one. Now, what does that actually mean? God will be one and His name. His name really means His reputation will be one. On that day, that is to say, on this day, and when that prophecy or that holy statement was made, God's name wasn't one. God's reputation wasn't one. What does that mean? And what is a reputation, for that matter? What is a reputation? It's not electricity you can put in a wire. It's not water you can put in a cup. What? It's not even a pulse that you can measure. What is reputation? Reputation is an attitude that a person takes in their mind. Reputation is a position that people take about anything. And when we do things in this world, we create a reputation. Could be for good, it could be for the opposite. So our behavior, our actions create reputation. So reputation is really the collective memory in other people's mind of you and me and God. It's the collective consensus memory of who Avraham Shira is and who Chuck is and who Muhammad is, etc., etc. That's all reputation is. It's how people think in their mind about somebody else. So we're told that God's reputation is not one. Meaning everybody has a different opinion about who God is, what He is, how He works, where He works, who He wants to do, what He wants to do, when, where, and how. Everybody has a different idea about God, whether they've been to rabbinical school or not, or they, or they went to learn by the Muslims or the Christians. But there will be a day where everybody has the same idea about the oneness. And that's Bayomahu. Yashem Echad Ushmo Echad. On that day, God and His reputation will be one. Where? In the minds of humanity. Now that day, in the literature, in Sefer Malachi and Zechariah, we're told that day corresponds to another day. A day that will not be light or dark. A day that will not be like any other day. It won't be bright, it won't be black, it will be gray, a completely covered over day. A day that's covered by a cloud. What kind of cloud will that be? Well, it could be a cloud of holiness, like the clouds of glory that covered the Jews when they came out of Egypt. Or it could be a cloud made of other things. We had a couple of clouds this week of dust from the desert because we had a big Shira, it's called. It's an eastern wind that comes out of the east. But you see, that day is a good day. It's not a bad day. But it depends on who your leader is, where your belief system is. But the important thing that gives a little bit of logical reference for us is to understand on the day that God and his reputation is one, we ask the question, where did it not become one? Well, it was when Adam and Eve ate from the idea of duality. We call it a fruit. We call it a tree of knowledge. It has many names and many metaphors. Not important. What's important is we understand what happened. Adam went from a childlike perception of the unity of reality, and he and his wife partook of the idea of a complex dualistic system of reality where man can actually think himself to be not part of creation. That we can see ourselves as separate. There's God and there's me. And there's God and there's you. That's the defect in itself. That was the original sin, or the result of what we call original sin, was the idea that we're separate in the first place. So the fixing is simply the return of the idea that we're not separate, that we're one, that we're in this singular unified field of divine energy, and we've got to get that back into our head. And that's where world peace begins. And that's why it's connected to Shabbat in this Parsha, because Shabbat, we're told, is Yom Kulo Shabbat, the day that is all Shabbat. It's 1,000 years long, and it's all peace. Why is it peace? Does everybody just go around shaking hands and hugging? No, it's because in our minds we suddenly see the oneness. And we stop fighting. And we stop arguing. And we stop categorizing each other. Oh, you're a Muslim. Oh, you're like this. Oh, you're a Christian. You're like that. Oh, you're a Jew like that. Oh, you're Orthodox. Oh, you're not Orthodox. All these categories of the mind are the very thing that's breaking down the oneness. And so the return of humanity to the pristine state that we had in the primordial garden is returning to that state of consciousness. And that's when the fall of Adam and Eve is repaired. And that's when the good times begin. Because we won't have to be taught. The rabbis tell us, our teachers tell us, we won't have to teach you in the future. You will know God. From the greatest to the smallest, we're told. We will all know. No one will have to tell. I won't have to sit here on Facebook and talk Torah. And I'm just sharing what I learned because it's what excites me. We won't even have to do that because you'll have your own open channel to that light of the oneness that will happen by Yom Hahu, Yeh Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. Every person will attach to that idea. Now, other things are going to happen. We're told that the Mount of Olives will split. An earthquake right through the Mount of Olives. And guess what the geologists found underneath the Mount of Olives, which is just east of where the Holy Temple stood, on what's called the Mount of Har Bayit, the Mountain of God. Right there, there's a fault line underneath the mountain that goes straight to the Dead Sea. And it hits the Syrian African fault line, which goes all the way from Africa to Syria. It hits at 90 degrees. It's a tiny little fault line off the massive separating fault line between the Asian continent and Africa and Europe. It's an interesting idea. That mountain is sitting on a fault line, and underneath it is a giant aquifer of water. And we're told when that mountain splits, the water is going to come out and make a river all the way to the Mediterranean, all the way to the Dead Sea. And it's going to turn the Dead Sea into a freshwater lake again, instead of what it is now, the saltiest body of water on planet Earth. How could it happen unless it got a big dump of rain, a lot of rain, a lot of time, a lot of rivers will flow. So you see, all of this is incorporated in one moment. The day that we see that it's one. Now really, the reason I talked about this in context with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the whole idea of Russia being this nation that's going to join with Persia, and that the Christian and the Islamic sides of theology are going to join up against the Jewish side, and all this kind of stuff that we don't like to think about. The point is that if I lived there, I would want to move. If I saw Putin's tanks lining up outside the border, I would be, cashing in my chips and getting out of Ukraine. And there's millions of people there. Millions and millions of people that haven't learned these books, that don't know why what's happening is happening, and why Putin does what he does, and why the Ukrainians have reacted, why the Ukrainians have been killing Jews for hundreds of years. Do they know their own history? Do they know their own history? The Cossacks that were financed by the Tsar to go into the Pale of Sediment and kill hundreds of people at a time, riding through on night with torches and bottles of vodka. Do they know their history? Probably not. And if they did, they wouldn't want to know. But there are scores being settled. There are shifts being made, and every time there's big war in the world, that's a sign that God is shaking up the system in order to bring about greater peace. As Rabbi Nachman teaches, you cannot have peace without war. People think we sit and talk and talk and talk and make peace. No, we talk and talk about peace, and then we can make war. So the righteous is telling us, no, the war is in order to bring a truer peace. That our peace wasn't real in the first place. And this is true on an individual level too. Why do children act out? Why do adults act out? Because they don't have inner peace. Their acting out is the war with themselves. And then why do husbands and wives not get along? Well, because they have some places that are not at peace. So when you see violence and you see a war of any level, it's really a preparation for a greater peace. If we conduct ourselves properly, if we understand the teachings that are emerging from our everyday lives. The Kohanim were chosen to be priests of peace, not priests of war, but the priest of peace, the Cohen HaGadol he's called, the great Cohen, he would be the one that would consult God about going to war. Not the head general. The head general in the Jewish structure of a government would not decide going to war. The priest would, because he would consult with God, because we trusted his connection to the higher truth. So this week's Parshat Emor deals with all the work of the Cohen in the Mikdash. The Cohen is the spiritual leader of the society. And remember, every healthy society has a spiritual leader, a military leader, and a government leader. And they're not all the same. And they're not supposed to be. And many countries have tried to mirror that structure here and there over history. But we see that without the Torah, without the moral law, humanity can't even maintain its own systems. Democracy crumbles, communism crumbles, monarchies crumble. Because, well, we're not in control of our lusts. We're not in control of our power unless we have a relationship to the one who creates them within us. So when we discover that relationship, and we discover that your power for war, your power for love, and goodness and truth and the opposite are still emerging from a very, very deep place in creation. And that's our partnership with God, to make those choices. So right now we have to choose to do the right things, to return to Hashem with all our hearts, and to pray for all those people who don't even know what prayer is. All those millions of people in Russia and Ukraine today, and in Eastern Europe, and who knows who else is in danger. Because when the madness lets go, it's not like you could just stop a train going down a mountainside. And that's what I'm afraid is being let loose right now. But we can at least pray for the people to wake up, to see, and to get to a safe ground, to get to a place where you're not going to be, threatened by nuclear missiles. It's an absurd idea. It's an absurd notion that killing people create goodness and peace. No, killing people creates revenge. And then you get more killing and more revenge and more killing. Isn't that what the Hollywood's been selling us for 70 years? All these gangster movies? So God should bless us all with the inner peace first, and the peace with our families, and peace with our children, the peace with our parents, peace with whoever we got to make peace with, we've got to make peace now. And peace with our governments and peace with the other governments. Because only from there does the blessing fall. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu machzik bracha el al yedei keli shalom. The only vessel God has for blessing is peace. And when you get the peace, then you get the blessing. And the blessing, of course, is your spark of God illuminates within you. And then you can see from the beginning to the end how everything is perfect and one. And then we get those eyes that we want to get at the end of days to see the oneness. And no longer will a man ask his friend to know God, because you will know automatically, intuitively from within yourself. God bless you all. Shabbat Shalom.